Subscribe to this channel for quick updates and important content. Don't miss out. Hit that button now.
People who claimed to be Romanovs but totally weren't. The Romanov dynasty ruled Russia for over 300 years, with strong family ties to European royalty. In the early 20th century, amidst rising nationalism and the First World War, monarchies began to fall, with the powerful Romanovs being the first. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children were imprisoned in central Russia, Ural, for months before being brutally murdered by the Ural Soviet on July 16, 1918. The family and their servants were secretly buried, and the world remained unaware of their fate until their remains were uncovered in 1991. After World War I and the Russian Revolution, chaos spread across Eastern Europe, forcing many Russians to flee and reinvent their lives. Among them, some claimed to be Romanovs, knowing people yearn for the fairy tale of a survivor. These imposters found success, playing on the tragedy of the Tsar's family until they were exposed, often by DNA testing. While money was a motive, most fake Romanovs sought attention. These were displaced people from a lost world, grasping at the allure of royalty. The woman who rose again. Anna Anderson is the most famous Romanov imposter. In 1920, she was pulled from a Berlin canal and placed in an asylum for medical care. There, she saw a magazine featuring the last Russian Tsar and his family, murdered in 1918, and quietly claimed she was one of the Tsar's daughters in the photos. This marked the start of her 60-year claim to be Anastasia, the youngest Romanov daughter. Although she bore no resemblance to the Grand Duchess, Anderson had 2 powerful advantages: a world eager to believe in a Romanov survivor and her ability to persuade. The brutal murder of Tsar Nicholas II's family, especially the children, had left the public and the Romanovs' extended family longing for a miracle. Anderson convinced many grieving relatives, who supported her claim for decades. Over time, she gathered detailed knowledge about Anastasia's life, learning about her clothing, acquaintances, and palaces. Her remarkable memory helped her maintain the ruse, and she always found wealthy backers willing to believe in her survival. She even crafted a detailed backstory explaining her escape and why she couldn't speak Russian, claiming trauma had caused her to block the language. While some Romanov relatives saw through her, others were convinced. Despite being investigated and identified as a Polish factory worker named Franziska Shanskowska, Anderson's story gained fame. She was featured in Life magazine, inspired the movie Anastasia, and became a cultural icon. However, in the end, science prevailed. After the Romanovs' remains were discovered in 1991, DNA testing compared their samples to Anderson's preserved tissue from a surgery. There was no match. Later tests confirmed she was Shanskowska, finally exposing the most convincing Romanov imposter, the Estonian Alexei. Despite the fact that 13-year-old Tsarevich Alexei suffered from hemophilia, a condition that led to short, painful lives at the time, many imposters claiming to be Alexei emerged after the Romanov family's disappearance in 1918. One such imposter was an Estonian man named Ernest Veerman, who immigrated to Canada and ran a print shop under the alias Heino Tammet. For reasons unknown, he kept his alleged royal identity a secret until he was 68. When questioned about how he survived the massacre, especially as a hemophiliac, Veerman claimed he had been misdiagnosed and never actually had hemophilia. Few believed him, given the ample photographic evidence and written accounts from doctors and caregivers that confirmed Alexei's suffering and treatments. Veerman was deaf in one ear, which he attributed to a gunshot near his head during the Romanov massacre. For a time, he actively pursued his claim, writing letters to British and Scandinavian royalty, seeking recognition as Alexei. His efforts led to official inquiries, a medical exam, and an eventual order to cease his claims. Afterward, Veerman became quieter about his assertions. His health declined, and he passed away from leukemia in 1977. His third wife continued to support his claim, even offering a tooth for DNA testing, though the test was never conducted. The false Olga Nikolaevna. Olga Nikolaevna, Tsar Nicholas's eldest daughter, was tragically killed with her family at the Ipatov house in Ekaterinburg, Russia, on the night of July 16, 1918. Among her imposters, the most well-known was Marga Butz. After marrying a German military officer in 1926, Butz privately claimed to be Grand Duchess Olga, asserting that her uncle, the exiled Kaiser Wilhelm II, was protecting her until it was safe to reveal her identity. She insisted speaking out too soon would cost her life. Years later, inspired by Anna Anderson's success as Anastasia, Butz made her identity public. She dismissed Anderson's claims while promoting her own, even writing a book about her supposed escape from the massacre, though it was never published. When Butz died in 1976, her gravestone bore the name Olga Nikolaevna, though the grave was reportedly destroyed in 1995. The belly dancer. It's a bit ironic that Tatiana, the most refined and reserved of Tsar Nicholas II's daughters, became the subject of a belly dancer's impersonation. Tatiana, with her slightly exotic beauty, would have been the last of the 4 Grand Duchesses to embrace belly dancing, even in exile. This isn't to judge the émigrés, both noble and common, who were forced into unexpected jobs to survive. Many displaced Russian princes and princesses found themselves working as salespeople, dancers, or restaurant hostesses across Europe and America. Then, there's the intriguing case of Larissa Tudor. Little is known about her early life, but she lived in England and married Owen Frederick Morton Tudor in 1923. She passed away at just 28, never claiming to be Tatiana. However, her gravestone bore the name Larissa Fyodorovna, with Fyodorovna being a common Russian patronymic used by foreign brides of Russian princes. While this raised eyebrows, the name alone wasn't enough to prove royal ties, as many Russian women had fathers named Fifer. Still, rumors persisted. Larissa resembled Tatiana in photos, and she left her husband a large inheritance of mysterious origin. Whispers circulated that Larissa was actually Grand Duchess Tatiana, who had escaped the massacre, fled to Istanbul, and worked as a belly dancer. Though none of these rumors were true, Larissa Tudor's story remains one of the more romanticized Romanov imposter tales. The Secret Romanov Daughter. The story of Susanna Katharina de Graaf brought a new twist to the Romanov imposter saga. She claimed to be the 5th daughter of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, supposedly hidden at birth to spare her parents the embarrassment of having yet another daughter instead of the long-desired son. Anyone familiar with the close-knit Romanov family would immediately dismiss de Graaf's claim as false. While it's true that by 1901, Tsaritsa Alexandra and Nicholas were anxious to have a male heir due to Russia's strict laws requiring the throne to pass to a son, there's no evidence to support the idea of a hidden daughter. Alexandra, emotionally fragile and sensitive, may have suffered a hysterical pregnancy in 1903, but she gave birth to their only son, Alexei, a year later. However, rumors of a secret 5th daughter persisted, and this is where de Graaf built her story. She claimed that her father, Lender Johannes Hems, a known con artist, was entrusted by the Romanovs to raise this hidden daughter named Princess Alexandra. Hems even claimed the Romanovs paid him hush money for his role. Oddly enough, in 1919 he built a luxurious new home, fueling speculation. De Graaf played along, claiming she had received a Romanov dowry that included 5 million rubles and other valuables. A book later suggested that these rubles were pre-revolutionary and in pristine condition. In the early 1950s, de Graaf met Anna Anderson, the infamous Anastasia imposter, and the two maintained a correspondence, with Anderson recognizing de Graaf as her sister. De Graaf passed away in 1968, and only in the last 2 weeks of her life did she publicly reveal her supposed royal identity. Yet another Anastasia. Eugenia Smith arrived in the U.S. in 1922, listed on the passenger manifest as a 22-year-old married woman from Yugoslavia. She settled in the Chicago area, working as a shop girl. Quietly, she began claiming that she was Grand Duchess Anastasia, having survived the 1918 massacre of the Romanov family. Over the years, She wove elaborate tales of her life in Russia and her escape, attracting the attention of wealthy supporters, much like the more famous Anastasia imposter, Anna Anderson. She became a frequent guest in the homes of these affluent backers. By 1963, Smith decided to go public, publishing an autobiography filled with vivid details of waking up in the blood-soaked basement of the Ipatiev house, surrounded by the bodies of her family. She recounted how a soldier helped her escape and flee west of Serbia. Her tale ended there, leaving much to the imagination. Though publishers were hesitant, her book was eventually released, gaining her both supporters and critics. Gleb Botkin, son of the Romanov family's doctor, was a staunch supporter of Anna Anderson and dismissed Smith's claims. Yet, Smith found strong backing from Michael Goleniewski, another Romanov imposter who claimed to be Tsarevich Alexei. In the late 1960s, Goleniewski spread a rumor that Smith had been murdered by the Rockefellers to prevent her true identity from being revealed, but Smith was still very much alive. The revival of the Anastasia story led to her appearance on the cover of Life magazine, where she posed between portraits of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, whom she claimed as her parents. Later in life, Smith seemed to distance herself from the royal claim. In 1984, when contacted for an interview, she declined. A decade later, with DNA tests confirming the Romanovs' fate in the news, she again refused offers to undergo a DNA test. When she passed away in 1995, some newspapers published her obituary using the real Anastasia's birth date and birthplace. The secret agent, Michael Goleniewski, a former Soviet spy, boldly claimed to be Tsarevich Alexei, despite being 18 years younger than the real Alexei. In contrast to the frail, hemophiliac heir, Goleniewski was healthy, an immediate red flag. Nevertheless, he insisted that he had miraculously survived the massacre of the Romanov family and somehow ended up working for the Soviet Union. In reality, Goleniewski was a Polish man who started his intelligence career as a spy for the Polish government before switching sides to work for the Soviets. At one point, he operated as a triple agent, spying for Poland, the USSR, and the USA. In 1961, Goleniewski defected to the United States, where the CIA was thrilled to recruit him as a spy. His arrival was met with such enthusiasm that Congress passed a private bill granting him U.S. citizenship. But once his position was secure, Goleniewski began loudly claiming he was Alexei Romanov. He even met fellow Romanov imposter Eugenia Smith and declared her to be his long-lost sister, Anastasia. To the press, he asserted not only that he had survived, but that his entire Romanov family was alive and hiding in Europe. He even initiated an investigation to recover Romanov assets as the sole surviving heir. However, his outlandish claims became so disruptive that the CIA eventually dismissed him. Undeterred, Goleniewski continued to insist on his royal identity until his death in 1993. The gold-digging babushka. By the early 21st century, the wave of Romanov imposters had mostly faded, but a late arrival stirred things up once more. In 2002, an elderly Georgian woman named Natalia Petrovna Bilikhodze emerged, claiming to be the long-lost Grand Duchess Anastasia. Her announcement came during a press conference, coinciding with the release of her book, I Am Anastasia Romanova, which Russian media dismissed as pathetic. Bilikhodze offered her own twist on the Romanov escape story. She claimed that, unlike the rest of her family, she was not executed. Instead, with help, she fled to Georgia, where she married and remained in hiding for years, fearing assassination. It wasn't until 1995 that she began to reveal her true identity. The motivation for her eventual public claim? Money. Bilikhodze asserted that the Russian government owed her the Romanov fortune, which she estimated to be around $3 trillion. However, she insisted her goal was not personal gain. She wanted to distribute the wealth to the Russian people. Though her claim made headlines in 2002, the footage used by the media was already 2 years old, and Bilikhodze had actually passed away by then. In fact, DNA tests conducted in 2001, using tissue samples from Bilikhodze, conclusively proved she had no relation to the Romanovs, the otherwise perfectly sane prisoner. Like Anna Anderson, Nadezhda Vasilieva emerged in 1920, claiming to be Grand Duchess Anastasia, but she hailed from Siberia. On her journey to safety in China, she was intercepted, questioned, and arrested by Bolshevik authorities. Over the next 15 years, she endured multiple prisons, reaching a particularly low point when she was sent to an island gulag in the White Sea. Despite the hardships of Soviet imprisonment, Vasilieva maintained a lively, albeit one-sided, correspondence with King George V of Great Britain, pleading for help and money in both French and German. In 1934, she was transferred to a prison hospital, where she continued to solicit support from officials willing to listen. At one point, she abandoned her Romanov claim, insisting instead that she was the daughter of a wealthy merchant, but later reverted back to her Anastasia identity. Vasilieva passed away in a Kazan insane asylum in 1970. The hospital director remarked that, aside from her claim to be Anastasia, she was completely sane, the South African grandmother. In 1954, an older woman named Alina was living in South Africa without any papers or documentation. The Duval family took her in, and she quickly claimed to be a Russian princess, specifically Grand Duchess Maria Nikolaevna, the third daughter of the last Tsar. She urged them to keep her identity a secret, fearing exposure and deportation back to Russia. Gabriel Duval, who was a young man at the time, noted that his family was not related to Alina, but she became part of their household, earning the affectionate nickname Granny Alina. Although she never publicly asserted her royal identity, she lived quietly, revealing only her basic background and refusing to discuss her life in Russia or her alleged dramatic escape. According to Duval, while his family was inclined to believe her, they found little resemblance between Alina and photographs of Maria Romanova. Duval remarked her jaw was too broad, but Alina explained that her jaw had been broken during the Ekaterinburg massacre, which changed her appearance significantly. Granny Alina passed away in 1969, but in 2004, Duval published a book about his experiences with her. He remained convinced of her royal status and desired for her to be buried alongside her family in St. Petersburg, Russia. Her remains were exhumed for DNA testing, but the results were negative. Duval continued to assert that her facial bone structure and eyes were identical to those of Grand Duchess Maria, but his claims were not taken seriously, and the case is now considered closed.